The distant growl vibrated through the metal hull of the Vanguard, shaking the walls with a deep, guttural resonance. Lyra Reed's boots echoed sharply as she strode down the corridor, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The predator had been quiet for too long, and that silence unnerved her. She'd heard its growls before, deep and echoing, but something was different this time. She stopped outside the holding bay door, her breath shallow. "Ready for another round?" came a voice behind her, smooth and calculated. Lyra turned to face Commander Thorne, his face a mask of skepticism. He was tall, lean, with the steely demeanor of someone who had long since stopped believing in anything beyond military protocol. He regarded her as he would a soldier, not a person. "I hope this is worth the risk, Captain." She met his gaze. "You'll see." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the dark, expansive holding bay. Suspended in the center was a massive, hulking creature, Draxier, the apex predator of an uncharted world, its 6 red eyes gleaming in the dim light. Its massive body rippled with muscles, and its sleek black skin shimmered with an oily sheen. It looked like death personified, a force of nature crafted for nothing but destruction. The Council had wanted it destroyed. They'd called it a threat, a ticking time bomb that needed to be neutralized before its existence became a problem. But Lyra wasn't convinced. The creature's intelligence, its poise, and something deeper, a kind of unspoken connection, had drawn her in, unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Draxier was not a mindless beast, it was something else entirely. "Control yourself," Thorne's voice sliced through her thoughts. His hand hovered over the release lever for the tranquilizer darts, just in case. "This thing's a ticking time bomb. Don't make the same mistake your predecessors did." Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow step forward, her eyes fixed on the predator. The air seemed to shift, thick with an ancient energy, as though the very room had become sacred ground. Draxier's eyes flickered, its gaze locking with hers. It was then that the growl returned, low, rumbling from the back of its throat, but not aggressive. It was questioning. Lyra's pulse quickened, but she steadied herself. "You don't have to attack," she said, her voice calm, almost coaxing. "There's another way. We don't have to fight." Thorne stiffened behind her. "What are you doing, Captain?" "It's a wild animal. We've studied its species for decades, and there's no way to reason with it." Lyra didn't look back. She was too focused on Draxier. Slowly, she extended her hand, palm facing down. "You can feel it." "I know you can." For a long moment, the creature simply stared at her, its breath coming in soft, controlled bursts. Then, impossibly, it lowered its head slightly, as if considering her words. Thorne's voice was harsh, disbelief threading through his tone. "This is insane. You're giving it the chance to kill us all. You're risking everything." "I'm not risking anything," Lyra responded, her words steady as stone. "This is what humanity does. We reach out. We try." Before Thorne could argue further, Draxier took a hesitant step forward, its massive paws sinking into the floor with an eerie silence. Lyra didn't flinch. She kept her gaze locked on the creature, heart pounding but her stance unwavering. The tension between them was palpable, an invisible thread pulled taut, waiting to snap. "Captain," Thorne warned again, his voice edged with panic. "Don't." But it was too late. With a low growl, Draxier extended its massive head, sniffing the air around her. Lyra held her breath, afraid that the smallest movement could set off an unpredictable chain reaction. But instead of lunging, it continued its slow, deliberate approach. The creature's breath grew shallow, its nostrils flaring as it leaned closer, and for a split second, Lyra thought she could feel the heat radiating from its body. Then, unexpectedly, Draxier's large tongue flicked out, brushing gently against the palm of her hand. Lyra didn't move, didn't even blink. It was as though time had stopped. Her heartbeat, though fast, was steady. The creature's touch was not one of violence, but of curiosity, an unspoken agreement between them. Thorne's breath caught in his throat. He stood frozen, watching as the most dangerous being they'd ever encountered regarded Lyra with a mixture of caution and acknowledgement. "Are you insane?" Thorn finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "That thing could kill you with a thought." Lyra remained focused on Draxier, her voice soft but firm. "It won't." The creature stepped back, its 6 eyes watching her with an intensity that felt almost human. Lyra exhaled, slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She could feel the eyes of the council watching, waiting for her next move. The stakes had never been higher. Her communication with Draxier had already made its mark. But now, there would be consequences. There always were when humans did the impossible. And the Galactic Council would make sure to remind her of that. The hum of the Vanguard was a constant in the background as Lyra Reed sat alone in the observation deck. Through the glass, the vastness of the planet below seemed to swallow the ship whole. The coordinates they had entered led them to a desolate, rocky world, uninhabited and untouched by civilization. But it was more than that. It was the key to everything, the last piece of the puzzle. The growls from the holding bay echoed in her mind. Draxier, the apex predator, had proven something she hadn't expected, its intelligence. Lyra had felt the connection between them, something primal and unspoken. Yet, she knew she couldn't explain it. Not to her crew. Not to the council. The communication chime broke her thoughts. Lyra's fingers danced over the console, and Admiral Zarek's face filled the screen. His sharp features were lined with impatience, his piercing eyes fixed on her. "Captain Reed," Zarek's voice was low, carrying an edge of command that Lyra had long grown accustomed to. "What is this nonsense about an alliance with a dangerous creature? The council is livid." Lyra's expression hardened. "You'll have to take that up with them, Admiral. I'm doing my job. The council's job is to protect the galaxy. Yours is to follow orders," Zarek snapped. "This creature is a threat. If you refuse to terminate it, we will take matters into our own hands." Lyra took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the console. "You don't understand. It's not just a creature, it's a sentient being. I felt it." Zarek's gaze turned cold. "You felt it?" He leaned forward, his tone mocking. "This is no time for feelings, Captain. The Vanguard was sent to neutralize a threat, not play therapist to a monster." "I'm telling you, Admiral, this is bigger than any of us," she responded, her voice unwavering. "Humanity is the only species capable of seeing beyond the surface. I know it can work with us. We can communicate." Zarek's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. If you continue down this path, you will answer to the council. I don't care how you justify it." Before she could respond, the screen flickered off, leaving Lyra alone with her thoughts once more. Her heart raced, but not from fear. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, but she didn't regret it. She wasn't about to let the council dictate her every move. Humanity had always been capable of more than anyone thought possible. It was time for the galaxy to see that. Behind her, the door to the observation deck opened. Thorn stepped inside, his face taut with concern. "I overheard. You're still going through with this? You're on a collision course with the council. You know they won't tolerate this." Lyra turned slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I don't care what the council wants. I care about what humanity can become. And this is our chance." "Your chance," Thorn corrected, crossing the room with purposeful strides. "You're dragging the rest of us into this with you. I don't know what you think you saw in that creature, but you're betting the entire ship on it. If it goes south—" "It won't," she interjected, cutting him off. "I can feel it. We're not just going to survive, Thorn. We're going to thrive." Thorn's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You're playing with fire, Lyra. Just don't burn us all in the process." Her gaze hardened. "I'm not playing. And neither are you. We all have our roles. You keep this ship running, I'll keep us moving forward." Thorn opened his mouth to argue, but hesitated. A long silence stretched between them before he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I've got your back. Just make sure you're right about this." Lyra nodded, though she could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. She wasn't wrong about Draxier. She couldn't be. But there was something darker on the horizon, a storm that none of them had seen coming. Below them, Draxier paced restlessly in the holding bay. Its massive form shifted in the shadows, its claws clicking on the metal floor with a rhythmic, unsettling precision. Lyra hadn't told the crew the full story, not yet. Not about what Draxier had shown her in those fleeting moments of connection. The creature's intelligence went beyond any understanding they'd assumed. Lyra knew that Draxier had a purpose, something far more complex than simple survival instincts. It had been wounded, not just physically, but emotionally. Something in its past had fractured it, twisted it into the thing it was now. And Lyra? She was determined to fix it. But the Council would never understand that. They would never see what she saw. Lyra stood up and walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the quiet of the observation deck. Thorne's words lingered in her mind, but she didn't let them sway her. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. The stakes were too high. As the door hissed open and she stepped into the hall, the ship's alarms blared, sharp and deafening. "Captain! We have incoming," shouted one of the crew members over the comm. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this meant. The Council's response had arrived sooner than expected. And it wasn't going to be pretty. "All hands, prepare for battle," Lyra ordered, her voice steady despite the storm building within her. "It's time to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." The Vanguard surged forward, a sleek beast of its own, and Lyra knew the war for the future of the galaxy had just begun. Lyra stood at the bridge, her hands gripping the cold metal of the control console. The Vanguard was cloaked in the shadows of the planet's twin moons, its sleek hull blending into the expanse of deep space. The familiar hum of the engines had taken on an ominous tone, vibrating through her bones. Ahead, the enemy fleet loomed, a stark contrast against the starlit backdrop, their dark silhouettes sending a chill through her body. "Enemy ships entering firing range in 3 minutes, Thorne's voice came over the comm. His tone was clipped, professional, but Lyra could hear the tension beneath it. "We don't have 3 minutes, she muttered, more to herself than anyone. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Activate all shields." "Captain," said Lieutenant Drake, her voice tight with concern, "the enemy's bringing in reinforcements. They'll overwhelm us before we can break through." "Not if we can take out their flagship first," Lyra responded without hesitation. She knew what had to be done. The Council had sent the fleet to neutralize them, her, the Vanguard, and the apex predator. But they'd underestimated the one thing that humanity did better than any other species: adapt. It was the one thing the Council had failed to account for. The crew of the Vanguard was a mix of seasoned veterans and bright-eyed recruits, all bonded by Lyra's leadership. She had pushed them beyond their limits, but they trusted her. That was something she couldn't afford to lose now. Every decision counted. "Captain, we've detected an incoming transmission," Drake continued. "It's from the enemy flagship." Lyra's gaze sharpened. "Patch it through." A crackling voice filled the bridge. "Captain Reed, we've had enough of your games." The voice was smooth but dripping with venom. "This is Admiral Corsac of the Council's fleet. Surrender now, and we'll consider a peaceful resolution. Resist, and we'll annihilate your ship and the creature you're harboring." Lyra's jaw clenched, her mind racing. The threat was real. Corsac was no fool. He knew the stakes. But he didn't know her. Didn't understand humanity. "I'm not interested in your peace talks, Admiral," she shot back, her voice steady. "We've already made our choice. We'll be the ones deciding how this ends." A sharp intake of breath echoed in the silence of the bridge. The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but Lyra didn't let their apprehension infect her. She had seen too much to back down now. "You're out of time, Captain. You're making a grave mistake," Corsac's voice crackled, before the transmission ended. Lyra turned to Thorn, who was already locking eyes with her. "We take their flagship, or we die trying." Thorn didn't flinch. He nodded, his gaze unreadable. "I'll get the team ready. You just give the word." The countdown to engagement began in earnest, and Lyra felt the pressure of the coming battle settle over her like a storm cloud. She trusted Thorn, but she had no illusions. Even if they managed to cripple Corsac's ship, it would only be the beginning of the war. The Council would send more ships. More reinforcements. Humanity's very existence would be on the line. Her fingers flew over the controls, guiding the Vanguard through a series of complex evasive maneuvers. The enemy ships moved in, forming a wedge around their flagship. She could see their sensors flaring to life, tracking them as they made their approach. "Shields at 85%, Drake called out. "Incoming fire in 3 seconds. "Steady," Lyra said, eyes fixed on the display. The ship groaned beneath her as the first blast rocked them. The bridge lights flickered, but the shields held. "Return fire." Lyra barked. "Focus on their engines. We need them crippled before they can regroup." The Vanguard shuddered again, but the crew was already in motion, weapon systems blazing. Lyra could hear the tension in the crew's movements, the sound of hands flying over controls, the quick breathing of soldiers ready for battle. The ship's pulse was steady and unyielding. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, and alarms blared across the bridge. The wall to her left splintered, metal screeching as another blast hit. Lyra's teeth ground together as her eyes darted to the readouts. The damage was substantial, but they were still operational. "For now." "Captain." Thorn's voice came over the comm, frantic. "The apex predator, it's breaking out of its holding bay." "It's..." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "Something's happening to it. It's reaching out to us. I think it's trying to help." Lyra's thoughts spun. She had never seen Draxier act like this, not in all the time they'd been together. It was instinctual, primal. But now, it was more than that. It was joining the fight. And for the first time, Lyra felt that connection again, deeper, more intense, like the creature was finally trusting them. "Deploy the drones," Lyra ordered sharply. "Get Draxier to the front lines. We're going to need every advantage we can get." A few seconds later, the metallic groan of the ship's hull reverberated through the bridge as the containment doors to the holding bay were blasted open. The creature's growls were deafening as its massive form emerged, its eyes glowing with a strange, almost otherworldly fury. The crew stared at the spectacle, unsure of what was happening, but Lyra's face was calm. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. "This is it," she whispered to herself. Humanity and Draxier. Together. The tension on the bridge reached its peak as the Vanguard hurtled into the heart of the enemy fleet, Draxier's primal fury driving them forward. It was the beginning of the end, of the war for the galaxy, and for humanity's place within it. The Vanguard cut through the enemy fleet like a knife, its hull battered but resilient, its weapons firing with precision. Lyra stood at the helm, her eyes locked onto the central display, where Corsac's flagship loomed large, its looming dark shape still intact despite the chaos unfolding around it. "Shields are down to 45%. Drake's voice was strained. "We're taking heavy fire from their cruisers." Lyra didn't flinch. The crew had been trained for this. They had prepared for worse. "Hold it together," she said calmly, her voice a steady anchor amidst the growing storm. "Focus fire on their engines. We take their flagship, we take the fleet." "On it," Thorn replied, his voice determined. From the tactical station, his hands flew over the controls, issuing orders to their drone squadron and targeting their weapons. The Vanguard bucked as another blast tore into the ship, but the shields held. "For now." Lyra's grip tightened on the control panel as a sudden crash echoed from the rear of the ship. "Report," she barked. "Engine room reports a breach," Drake said quickly. "Containment's holding, but we're losing power in the aft section. We need to fix it, or we won't be able to outrun their reinforcements." Lyra's eyes flicked to the swirling mass of enemy ships. Not an option. Her mind worked quickly. Get a damage report from engineering. They can handle it, but right now, we need to finish this. Now. On the view screen, the Vanguard's drones swarmed the enemy cruisers, their rapid-fire beams causing explosions and ruptures across the enemy line. The Vanguard's hull shuddered again as they fired another series of shots at the flagship's shields, but it wasn't enough. Corsac's ship remained steadfast, its massive hull remaining impervious to the barrage. Their shields are holding, Thorn reported grimly. We can't get through with the current power output. Lyra exhaled slowly. This was the moment. The one she had been preparing for, without truly knowing how it would play out. Her gaze darted across the crew, each of them poised, ready for the next order. Activate Draxier, Lyra commanded. Her voice was unwavering, but her heart raced with anticipation. If this failed, if Draxier couldn't break through, there was nothing more they could do. A low, guttural growl filled the bridge, and the ground beneath them rumbled as the containment door at the rear of the ship opened. The massive form of Draxier emerged, his dark shape a blur of muscle and primal fury. His eyes locked with Lyra's, a silent understanding passing between them. There was no hesitation in his movements as he made his way toward the central airlock. Thorn raised an eyebrow. You're sure about this? Lyra didn't meet his eyes. She didn't need to. The trust between them, forged in countless battles, needed no words. I have no other choice. Open the airlock. The hiss of pressurized air signaled the opening of the hatch. Draxier stepped into the vacuum of space, his enormous body disappearing into the infinite void with a grace that belied his size. Lyra's heart pounded. The plan was reckless, but it was their only chance. Draxier wasn't just a weapon. He was a force of nature, a creature unlike any other, and if they could just break through the flagship's hull, they could force Corsac's hand. He's reaching the flagship, Thorn said, his voice low, almost reverent. Lyra nodded, her mind already shifting to the next move. We can't afford to wait for him. Full speed ahead. The Vanguard surged forward, its engines pushing them faster through the swarm of enemy ships. Lyra's hands gripped the console tighter as explosions rocked their hull. They were close. Too close. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to retreat, to fight another day. But there was no time for fear, no time for retreat. Draxier's inside, Drake said, her voice breaking through the chaos. He's tearing through their hulls. Their secondary shields are weakening. The Vanguard rocked violently as another blast came from the flagship, but Lyra kept her gaze fixed ahead. She could see it now, the opening, the weak point where the shields had failed. The flagship's engines flickered, its once solid defensive perimeter crumbling under the onslaught of Draxier's fury. Now, Lyra said, voice barely above a whisper. Give them everything we have. The Vanguard's weapons came to life, every gun firing at once, the intense barrage tearing into the flagship's final defenses. The hull of Corsac's ship exploded in a shower of fire and debris, sending shockwaves rippling through space. But the flagship didn't go down. Not yet. And then came the sound that would haunt Lyra's mind for the rest of her life, a scream. It was an inhuman sound, a roar of rage and defeat as the flagship's main reactor exploded. It didn't matter how much firepower they had. The blast was Draxier's doing. Lyra stood frozen as the flagship's remains drifted into the void. She didn't know whether to feel relief or guilt. The battle was over, but the war? It had only just begun. Captain, Thorn said, his voice tight with concern, there's no turning back now. We've made our stand. The Council will retaliate. Lyra exhaled slowly, her fingers trembling as they rested on the console. We fight, she said, her voice steady. For humanity. For Draxier. And for all who believe in what we stand for. The crew held their breath, eyes fixed on her. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message was clear. The war was far from over, but today, humanity had claimed its victory. and they would fight for that victory until their last breath. The stars outside seemed to grow brighter as the Vanguard moved onward, no longer just a ship, but a symbol of resistance, hope, and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds.